Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of this creating a multiplayer first-person shooter game from ground zero. So we're going to be picking up right exactly where we left off in the last video. And in this video, we're essentially going to try to get the character meshes in and the character blueprint started and the character moving around and possibly animated as well. So, with that, in our multiplayer FPS folder here, we're going to create another new folder, and we're going to call this one Characters. And inside this folder, actually for now, well, actually, let's go ahead and do that, right? So let's go ahead and make another folder, and we'll call this one Blueprints. Like so. And then inside here, this is where we're going to create two blueprints to start with. So we're going to select to create a blueprint class, and this is going to be a character blueprint, which is a blueprint that is pre-manufactured from Epic Games. It comes by default in the Unreal Engine. And we're going to call this BP Character Master. And we're also going to go ahead and create our animation blueprint. So we're going to go under the animation section here and create an animation blueprint. This will be an anim instance, and this is asking you which skeleton is this animation blueprint for. And in this case, we only have the default mannequin skeleton in here, so that's the only one that we will can select. And we're going to call this one ABP, that stands for Animation Blueprint, Character Master. Just like that. And then we will save all the things. So we're going to be creating a first person only game. So we're going to have to make some modifications to our gray dummy because the way that I set this up is actually the better way. A lot of videos that you guys will see, they'll just put a camera on the head of the third person mesh, and while that does make it easier to create a first person game, it also has a lot of drawbacks and stuff to it as well. So we're not going to be going that method. We're actually going to be creating it using 3 different meshes. So if you open up this gray dummy, as you can see here, we're going to have to go into an external program. Now, I happen to use Maya for this, you know, and you could probably also do this with Blender. However, I don't use Blender, so I don't know exactly the process to do it. So we're going to export this character out of here just by going to Asset Actions and Export. And I'm going to put that onto the desktop of my computer. Then we're going to open up Maya and make our modifications to this. So if you're using Blender or some other 3D application, you'll just have to try to do this. Or alternately, if you can't, I can make these 2 meshes we're going to create available. Okay. So with Maya opened up, I'm going to make sure that I'm in the modeling section here. And we're going to import from the desktop that gray mannequin skeleton, skeletal mesh. And one thing to note is that I am using Z up as my axis in this Maya. So everything in Unreal Engine is in Z up. And so if your 3D application is not using Z up, you'll have to look through the preferences and the settings to see how you can make it be that way. If you're making assets and working with assets that are in the Unreal Engine, you need to make sure that your 3D application is using ZUp, because it'll just make things easier in the long run and not as confusing. Okay. So anytime you export a skeletal mesh out of the engine, the engine adds a couple things to this that are unnecessary. So I'm going to go up here to Windows, and I'm going to go to this called Outliner. And essentially what this is everything that is in the scene with this character. So if you're using Blender, I'm sure it's got an equivalent to show everything that's in the scene. So what happens is when you export a skeletal mesh out of the engine, it puts it in a group. The Unreal Engine does this. So what we have to do is ungroup these things. So I'm going to select the mannequin and hold down the left shift button and hit the P key, and that's the shortcut to unparent. We're also going to select the root, which is really the entire skeleton hierarchy. Hold down left shift and hit the P key, and then we're going to take this top group node and just delete it. And before we make any modifications to this, there is one piece of geometry on this character that I'm going to go ahead and delete because we don't really need it. And this will make it require less materials on this character. So there is a single piece of geometry on the chest of this character that sole purpose is for displaying you know what? Actually, let's just leave it because we might actually do something with that at some point. So never mind that. We're just going to leave that on there. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to hit export all. And I'm just going to export this back over top of the mannequin that's on my desktop. Just like that. Okay, so we're going to need the arms only of this mesh. So I'm going to select the skeleton of this character, the entire skeleton, and over here I'm going to go to layers and I'm going to say create layer from selected. And the reason I did this is just so I can toggle on and off the skeleton. And then we're going to create the arms mesh of this character first. So I'm going to select the character, I'm going to right click and go to UV and UV shell. This allows you to delete geometry by the UV shell of the character. Okay, so I'm essentially going to just select and delete the whole lower half of this character. And then I'm going to be a little bit more precise about this upper part. And I'm just going to start selecting things one at a time and deleting them until we get all this geometry removed. Every part except for the arms of the character. And that, then we're going to take the head, rid of that, and then we'll take and get the whole neck area here. Now, it's debatable about exactly how much of this you should delete. Like, you could probably delete these pieces here too. But in this instance here, I'm just going to go ahead and leave them. Because really, you're not really going to know exactly how much of this you need to delete until we get it in the engine and get the camera going. So now what we need to do is right click on a piece of geometry and go back to object mode. So anytime you delete geometry from a skeletal mesh, in particular, you have to run an operation on it. So over here, you see all these inputs where it's showing all these deleted components. That needs to be cleaned up in order to get it to go back into the engine properly. So all we have to do is select the geometry, come over here to edit, and we're going to go to delete by type, but we're going to select non-deformer history. And then we'll let it sit here and run its operation. Make sure you select non-deformer history, because if you pick just history, it deletes the skin weights, right? And you don't want to do that. And we're going to add to this here underscore arms. Then we're going to export this, export all, and we'll select this so that it'll put the name in here for us. And then we're going to underscore and put arms at the end of it. So this is going to be the mesh we use for the arms only. And then I'm just going to do a new scene. And we're going to bring back in the full body of this character again. And we're going to create the lower torso of this character. Okay. So it's essentially the same process. Let me go ahead and put this back on a layer so I can toggle this off. And this time around, we're going to delete everything except for the lower torso of this character. So we're going to go to UV and UV shell. And you guys can do this however you choose to. Like, you could just take and delete that much of the character and it'll probably be okay. But we're just going to take this and delete similar to what we did before, except we're going to leave the lower torso of this character. So let's start getting rid of all the arms. And then we might come up here and investigate this, and we might potentially be able to clean this up a little more. So I'm going to delete these top pieces off of this. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this little ball mesh out of here. So we're going to end up with something like that right there. And once again, we might have to come in here and modify this a little bit depending on... Actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and delete the inside of this thing too. Just like that. And then we end up with something like that right there. So with that, we're going to right click on a piece of geometry, go back to object mode, and we need to run that operation on it again. So edit, delete by type, non-deformer history. Let it run the operation and see how that cleans this up over here. That's so it goes back into the engine without any errors. And we're going to put an extension on this and call this torso, like so. And then we will export all this. And that is going to be the same name, except we're just going to add the extension torso at the end of this. All right, and that should be all we need to do in Maya here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this back down. And we'll talk a little bit about the import of this. So this is something that I try to stress to everybody. You really only have to have one skeleton. Regardless of how many characters that you're going to end up using in the end, as long as they conform to the same hierarchy as this default skeleton, you don't need multiple skeletons. You also really don't need multiple physics assets. So we're going to go ahead and do an import on this. And really all we need is the arms and the lower torso. So I'm just going to go ahead and select them both. Now in this import options here, first of all, it's asking you which skeleton is this going to use. If you do not select a skeleton, it's going to generate the skeleton that's contained within the FBX. In this case, we're going to direct it to use this one. It's the same skeleton, right? So we're going to tell it to use that one. Now, there's also some other things in the options here that we want to look at. One of them, let's see, where is it? It must be underneath this drop down here. So you see how by default it's set to create a physics asset? We're not going to be creating new physics assets. We're going to tell it to use this same one that already exists in here. And as you can see, if we hit this drop down here, it will allow us to select that physics asset. So that's how that's going to work. And we're going to also uncheck import materials because the material for this character is already in here. And we also are not going to be importing any textures. And then we just simply hit import all. And as you can see here, it brought in the arms only. which is going to be what we see in first person view. And we also are going to be seeing the lower torso. And it already automatically applied the material since it's basically the same thing that was already in here. So that is essentially it. So now what we need to do is start putting in our character blueprint in the blueprints here. We need to start populating this with our stuff, right? So we're going to do this step by step. And so this process will hopefully make more sense. Okay, so we're going to need a camera, right? That's really one of the first things that we're going to need. So we're going to go ahead and add a component here, and we're going to type in cam. And right there, you can see the camera comes up. And we're going to call this FP cam. We're just going to call it FP cam. And this can be positioned up more towards the top of this capsule component here. And then if you leave this selected, when you add a mesh, see, we already have a mesh component added here. But we're going to reserve this for our third person mesh. So we're going to create a new mesh component. So we're going to say add component, and we're going to type skeletal, and we're going to add another skeletal mesh component. And since I had the camera selected when I added that skeletal mesh component, it automatically parented it to the camera, which is exactly what we want it to do. But if when you add your component, so let's go ahead and add another skeletal mesh component. If you don't have anything selected, when you add it to parent it, all you really have to do is grab it and drag it over top of the camera. And it says drop here to attach skeletal mesh to camera. So those two objects do need to be parented together. Okay. And we're going to call this SK underscore arms. And we're going to go ahead and add one more here, which is going to be another skeletal mesh component. And this one doesn't need to be parented to the camera, only the arms. So this one here, if you select here when you add your component, if you select that top, it won't parent it to anything, it just puts it in there. This we're going to call SK underscore torso. Okay, and that's what we'll use for the lower torso of this character. So that pretty much is all we need to get started. So if we select the arms of this character and we hit right here for the mesh and we select the arms, you can see that it puts them in there. And as you can see here, you want your character to be facing down the X axis. See, X is forward in the Unreal Engine. So we need to rotate this character in the Z 90 degrees. Negative 90 degrees, my bad. So that it's facing forward. And then for the Z, you can just take this and drag it down. We're going to have to adjust this. So for now, we're just going to kind of get it in here ballpark close here. And we're also going to go ahead and put our torso in here. So we will do the same thing, select the torso, and we're going to put the torso. And we need to change this one too. So we're going to do negative 90 in the location in the Z. And we're also going to do negative 90 in the rotation of the Z. And then we can go ahead and compile and save this. So that is the beginnings of our character. That's exactly what it's going to be like. So the next thing that we need to do is get our character to actually be the character that spawns when we click the play button. So right now, when we hit play, you can see that we're still just spawning in as these default pawns here. So what controls a lot of things about your game is a blueprint called a game mode. So in this folder here, the multiplayer folder, we're going to add a new folder, and we're going to call this, let's just call it System Blueprints. Okay. And inside here, you know what? I'm not feeling that name. Let's just call it Blueprints. You got to be careful when you name things, because there is a limit to how long the names can be and how deep the folder structure can be. So for now, we're just going to call it Blueprints. And inside here, we're going to right click and we're going to create a new blueprint class. And this is going to be what's called a game mode base. And we're going to go ahead and prefix this with GM for game mode. And I name this what my project's called. So this is going to be MP _ FPS. Now, when we open this, you can see that the class is here. Basically, this is a container. This blueprint is a container that tells the game what other blueprints are going to be associated with this character. So you can see all these different blueprints that are able to be plugged in here. So the only thing that we need to do at this particular moment is define what our default pawn class is going to be. See? Right now, that's what we're spawning as the default pawn. So we need to change this to be our BP character master. That's the blueprint that is going to represent our character. Now, once you do that, you also have to tell the level that you're loading which game mode it needs to use. And that is in this tab here called World Settings. Right here, you can see it's asking for the game mode. So we are going to be plugging in our GM MP FPS game mode, and then we'll just hit a quick save here. And now when we hit the play button, you'll see that we are staring at that character. We can't move, we can't jump, we can't do anything. But we do now at this point actually have that character spawn in the way that it is supposed to spawn in. So now, before we do anything else worrying about the visuals of this character, let's get the character able to move around so that we can control it, okay? So, that is going to be contained inside the character blueprint. So we're going to open up this blueprint here. And in the event graph, it's already got some nodes in here by default. We're not going to be using these at this moment. So we're going to go ahead and just select all those and hit the delete key. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can define inputs in the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this into the input settings, which creates listings for this in your INI file. Okay. So up here, if you hit the settings, the drop down, and you go into the project settings, you're going to come over here and you're going to find in the engine a section called input. This is where you can define what buttons, when you mash a button, what does it do? What is it called? Now, the important thing to remember in here is that whatever you name these inputs, like whatever you decide to call them, when you get ready to put them into your character's event graph, you need to know what you called them, right? You need to know the name. So what I do is in the settings here, I'm going to create one action map and hit this fold out here, and I'm going to call this one jump. And then it's asking what button is going to make this character jump. So this is going to be the keyboard. Space bar is going to be what makes this character jump. And we're going to keep this basic for now, even though we may end up having lots and lots of key presses at some point. For now, we just need to get things working, okay? So an action map is not the same as an axis map. And we'll talk about that when we actually start implementing them. So for the axis map, I'm going to add one here called move forward. And this is going to control move forward and backward. We're going to combine both of those movements into one axis map, okay? So we're going to hit this plus sign here at the end of this, and that will give us the ability to make two buttons, two values, right? So this is going to be the keyboard W key, which will be forward. We're going to set up WASD. So this will be W, and this is going to be what makes it go backwards. So we're going to add another keyboard press, and this is going to be the S key. Now, the difference here is this is a value that it's going to put out when you mash that button. So we need the S key to be opposite of what the W key is. So we're going to change that scale value to -1 instead of 1. So when that value reads 1, it's going to make the character move backwards. When it reads 0, the character is not going to move at all. And when we press the S key, it's going to make it read -1, which is what we're going to use to make the character go backwards. So we're also going to need right and left. So we're going to make another one here, and we're going to call this one move right. And we're going to do the same thing, right? We're going to add another one, and this is going to be the keyboard D key will be what goes to the right. And this is going to be the A key, which is what will make it go to the left. And this value, once again, we need to change this to -1. So when that value is -1, we're going to reverse the direction the character is moving. Now we need to control the mouse, right? We need to put in what's going to make the character pitch up and down and turn left and right. So we're going to add another input here. And we're going to call this one look up. And for this one, this is going to be the mouse Y axis. And we need to go ahead and reverse this to -1. Because if we don't do this, just to be clear why I'm doing this, you ever played an airplane game? When you push up, it goes down, and when you pull back, it goes up. If you do not reverse this, that's exactly how your pitch is for your character, and I don't like that, right? I don't want it to be controlled that way. So I reverse this value here. And we're going to add one more, which is going to be called turn. And this is going to be the mouse X axis, okay? And we don't have to reverse that one. So now that we did that, I want to go ahead and just show you guys really quickly what that does. So by putting it in the input settings that way, what it does is in your project directory, in your My Documents, Unreal Projects, this project, if we go into our config, you're going to see that it creates a file in here called default input. If you open this up, you can see that this is what it adds. When you put it in your input settings, it actually adds it to an INI file, which can then later be used to change the keys that do things. Meaning you can give the end user the ability to remap their key bindings. If they don't like the way that it's controlled, you can at a later date implement logic into your game to allow the end user to be able to remap those keys. Okay? So I just wanted to show you guys where that actually goes. Okay, so now that we did that, we're still not going to be able to do anything, right? So even though we defined all of our key presses and stuff, that's only the buttons that make it, that are going to make it do what we named those. So to get it to do what we named those, we go back into the character blueprint. And now we're going to access all those input settings. So this is why I said you had to remember what you called them, right? So we right click here, and this is going to be called move forward, right? That's what we called one of those inputs. And you can see that it has an axis event, and it also has a value. We want the events, not the values. And that's what gives you this node here. We're also going to be doing move right, and we want the axis event move right. So to get the character to move, we're going to be using what's called add movement input. This is a function built right into the engine, and this is what actually tells that character to move that capsule. This is that value that we defined that will go into the scale value. So when this button is not being pressed, this value reads 0. When you press the W key, we have it set to read 1, which tells this node to make it go forward. When we press the S key, it changes this value to be -1, which then reverses the input to make the character go backwards. Okay? So this add movement input has to be applied to a world direction. So there is a node in the engine built in called get control rotation. Okay. And from this control rotation, this is what all your directions of your character are. So since this is going to be the one that makes it go forward and backwards, first let's split this return value. So we're going to right click that pin and say split struct pin. And then we're going to make a rotator, right? So we're going to type make rotator. Right here it is, make rotator. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is because the only thing we need to manipulate with forward and backward is the yaw of the character. We don't need it to try to make it go forward like downward direction, okay? And then from this, we want to get the forward vector. That is the forward direction of the character. And that is what will make the character go forward. Now, to go backwards, to make it go right, hold on, my brain froze for a minute. To make it go right and left, we're going to be doing the same thing. So we can highlight this add movement input, hit Control W, and that is your shortcut for duplicate. So this is going to be doing the exact same thing. We're just going to be doing it in a different direction. So instead of the forward vector, we need to get right vector. So this will be right and left. So we'll go ahead and plug this in here. And just to be clear here, there's also get up vector. So this is all your directions of your character. Now, there is no get back vector or backward vector. It only gives you the forward vector, which if you reverse that by multiplying it by a negative value, that's backwards, right? So same as with right. There is no get left vector. It's only right. And if you need it the left vector instead, you still get the right vector. You just multiply it by a negative value, which will make it go the opposite direction, which essentially is left. The up vector, if you need the down vector instead, you get the up vector and multiply it by a negative value. Okay? So with that right there, let's just go ahead and put a comment box, drag your marquee, and hit the C key, and then you can call this movement input. Just like that. Now that should get the character WASDing. So let's test that. I like to test things as I go. That way, if I've done something wrong, it's easier to find it quickly, right? So I hit the W key. We still can't pivot up, down, left, and right, but if we hit W, you can see we go forward. If we hit S, we go backward. hit A, we go left, and hit D, and we go right. So we do have our WASD working, okay? So now we got to get the mouse working. So back in the character blueprint, in the event graph, these are a little bit easier to do. So do you remember what we called these, right? So one of them was called look up. We want the axis event for look up. And the other one, I believe we called it turn. So we want the axis event for turn. Now these ones, all you have to do is, this one is going to be look up and down. That's going to be the pitch. So if you just type pitch, you can see that there is an input function here called add controller pitch input. So that is quite literally all we have to do for the looking up and down. The turn would be yaw. So if we right click and type yaw, you can see that we have the opposite of the other one, which is called add controller yaw input. And that is all we have to do for that. And we'll go ahead and comment this and call this mouse input. Now let's go test it. Remember, I do this one step at a time. That way, if something breaks, I don't have to spend 3 hours trying to figure out that I just forgot to hook a pin up. So we'll go ahead and spawn in, and I'm moving my mouse, and you can see I'm turning left and right, but when I try to pitch up and down, it doesn't pitch, right? So that is a setting inside the character blueprint. If you select the camera, I thought we actually called that FP cam. I guess we didn't. So let's just go ahead and call that FP. Let's shorten the name of it to FP cam. We know it's a camera, so let's just call it cam. So with the FP cam selected, there is a checkbox in here that we need to check, which is right here. It's called use pawn control rotation. The moment that we check that box true, recompile and save this, now we should have the ability to pitch up and down. And as you can see, I can pitch up and down. Okay. Now we can look inside our torso here, and we're not going to worry about that just this minute, right? Because there's really no need to try to adjust any of the camera positions or any of that until we get it viewing the way that it's supposed to be, and animated, by the way. Okay. So remembering what it is that we're doing, which is creating a first-person game. We know that when we look at a character, we shouldn't be seeing any of that stuff, right? We shouldn't see any of that. So the first thing we need to do is make it so that we can't see that. The only people that are supposed to see that is us. We're going to be able to see our first-person arms, and we're going to be able to look down and see our lower torso. But the people that we're looking at and the people looking at us, they don't need to see any of that. They're going to be looking at our full body third person mesh. So inside the character blueprint, if you select the mesh of the arms, now remember, we're the only people going to be seeing this. So when you select the arms, if you come over to the section over here called rendering, there is a fold out here, and there is an option in here called only owner see. That means us, right? So if we check that to be true, that means the only person that's going to be able to see those arms is us. We also need to do the same thing for the lower torso. The only person that's going to need to see that lower torso is us. So with the lower torso selected, we're going to do the same thing. Only owner see. And now when we spawn in here, we should be absolutely invisible. I don't see that guy over there. And when I look down, I don't see, I see my torso, right? And he don't see us. So that's exactly correct. Now, another thing too that we're going to go ahead and deal with here is that none of that stuff needs to cast a shadow either, right? Because we're going to be using our third person mesh to generate the shadow that we see and everybody else sees. So we're going to take the arms of the character, and underneath the lighting, I think, where is this? Right here, underneath the lighting section, it has cast shadow set true. We're never going to need to see the arms shadow. We're going to be using our full body, so we're going to go ahead and uncheck that. The lower torso, also, we do not ever need to see that shadow, so we're going to uncheck it. And now we have no shadow, right? We can't see a shadow, and we can't see the other player. So now we need to put in what's going to represent what everybody looking at us and what we see when we look at other players. That's where in the character blueprint, this mesh here that comes in the character blueprint by default, that's what we're going to reserve that for. So in this mesh, this is going to be where we put in the full body of the character. And one step at a time, I know this is redundant. There it is, and it's floating and it's not facing the correct way, right? So let's go ahead and deal with this. So if we look at the viewport, obviously it needs rotated, right? So we're going to set the rotation to -90, and it's too high up, so this needs to be the same position the other one is, roughly. So we're going to change this to -90 here as well. And we will check it again. And now we are spawned in here. And now that's what we're going to see when we look at other people. We're going to see that full body mesh. Now, here's the thing. We can also see our own third person geometry. See that chest sticking out there? We do not need to see our third person character, right? Remember, we're only going to be viewing our arms and our lower torso. Everyone else is going to see our full body, but we do not need to see that, okay? So, similarly to how we did the others, if we take this mesh here and we come over here to the rendering section here, there is also one in here for owner no see. That means don't show this to us, but let everyone else see it. So we check that to be true, compile it and save it. And now we have it the way that it should be. The only exception is we still haven't adjusted the camera yet, and we're not gonna. Not until we get this character actually being animated so that we can position it. And another thing is that now I'm looking at that character over there and I see a full third person shadow on the ground. And he sees ours, and when we look down, we still don't see our own shadow yet. So we got one more setting that we need to change. Back inside the character, inside that third person mesh of this character, underneath the lighting section again, there is another fold out here, and inside here there is a setting in here called hidden shadow. That means even though that geometry is hidden from us, we still want to view the shadow of that hidden geometry. And by checking that true, now we should be able to see our full body shadow just the same as everyone else can. Okay? Okay. So the next bit of this is actually getting the character animated. Well, we didn't put the jump in, so maybe we should just go ahead and do that real quick. So inside the character blueprint, we got one more action event in here, which is called jump. And this one is really pretty easy. You right click and type jump, and there is a function underneath the pawn character right here called jump. When you press that button, you simply set that to jump. And then when you get done jumping, you need to type jump. And there is one function in here also called stop jumping. And so when we release the jump button, we're going to do that. And we'll go ahead and quickly comment this. And we will call this jump input. And now we should actually also have the jump happening. So when I hit jump, you can see the character launching up. And by the way, all this stuff right here replicates by default. We haven't had to do anything special in order to get any of this stuff to replicate. That's what I was mentioning in the other video when I said a character movement component, the one contained inside a default character blueprint, that means this thing. That is replicated by default from Epic. So that saves us a lot of work. We can get the general movement of the character to happen without having to do anything extra. Now, anything we add to this, that will have to be replicated, like playing animation montages and stuff like that. But the general basic movement of the character is controlled and replicated by default. Now, another thing to point out here is that this character movement component is quite complex. And I'm not going to sit here and go through every little single aspect of this until we actually need to. But for new people that are watching this video, it would be prudent for you to select the movement component and come over here and just read through all these different things. They're pretty self-explanatory for the most part. You can even adjust the character's gravity by changing this value right here. What angle the character is allowed to walk up, right? There's lots and lots and lots of settings in here that can be manipulated to alter the behavior of the movement of your character. And once again, I'm not going to sit here and go through all of them, but it would be a good idea just to sit here and read through these and see if, you know, you can understand what it is that they mean, right? And also, there's fold-outs here, right? And you might want to make sure that you go through there and look and read through all those different things. We will be manipulating some of these as we go through this project, but right now, the only thing I'm going to do is change the jump Z velocity. I'm going to make him jump higher. So I'm going to change that to 600 instead of the default. And that one setting there is what controls how high the character can jump. So see there, now he can go higher. Now, another thing that we'll go ahead and do is, you see how floaty this character is? Now, depending on the realisticness of the game, you might not care if it's that floaty, and you might not care if he jumps that high. But just to show you, if we go back to the character movement component and we change the gravity, let's double the gravity of this character and see what happens. Just by changing that value, now check out the jump. Now you're going to notice, first of all, he can't jump as high as he did before, and he don't float as much as he did. He comes down faster. So that one setting there can manipulate the way that the jump of the character actually behaves. So let's go ahead and put the gravity back to default for now, and we'll tinker with that stuff later. Okay? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here. This is a good cutoff place because we essentially got the base character blueprint made. And in the next video, we will start the process of getting this character to be animated when he's moving instead of just in an A pose. We will also start adjusting that camera so that when we look down, we actually see our lower legs and not inside our torso. So with that, we will see you guys in the next video. This is John Galt. You guys take care.